So one of the biggest mistakes I've made with coaching youth athletes is applying sort of an adult-based structure to them. So, for example, did an internship with Middlesex County Cricket, was lucky enough to work with their under-11s, but then a couple of times I've applied a warm-up that is too structured to 14-year-old girls in a PE lesson. What are some of the mistakes, A, that you've made with youth athletes, and B, how has some of the stuff you've learned from working with youth athletes actually transferred over to any work with adult populations you do?
I think like cues is a big one. Like sometimes you can use cues that are a bit too technical. Like I remember there's a lad that I do kind of privately who is a goalkeeper. And I remember he was moving relatively well, but it could have been better. And I gave him a cue and he actually started moving worse. And I just forget what I just said. Do what you were doing before. So I actually did the opposite of what a good coach would do. I made him worse. So sometimes being aware of how your cues are being interpreted. But I think like the biggest thing is like, it's obviously got to be fun. Like that's the biggest buy-in. People will do stuff that's fun. So for me, like I kind of have different scenarios. So in the context of like a team camp, say for like the under 16s where they're there for a week, I'll come in and it'll be like some sort of game as a heart raiser. If it's more kind of within a gym session, like mixing it up, creating challenges and conditions. So for example, like I had people doing hurdle drills the other day, but I kind of put in a condition where we kind of mixed the hurdles up in terms of direction. I said, right, you're only allowed to have one foot on the floor at any one time. And this next time it was, okay, you can go, every time you go over a hurdle, you have to go through the next one. So kind of I set the constraints and then they came up with what that looked like. So having the imagination to create a bit of variety, giving them things. So for example, saying, okay, I want you to set up an obstacle course and about kind of jump and land mechanics around that. So I think those are some things. The things that translate into adult clients. So I think cues, like the big one is progressions and regressions, like you learn from coaching kids. And then also like simple programs are often the most effective. Like you don't need to jump into a West Side Cube method or Texas. Like sometimes actually starting strength will do. And, 3 sets of 5 is enough. I think a big take home I got from the last Athletic Evolution conference was from my friend Shane Fitzgibbon. And he basically says, if it works with a kid, it will work with an adult, but not vice versa. Which I think is really good. Like a lot of kids' games, I will go and I'll do with maybe some of my older athletes who may be 18 or 20, and it works. But you can't do things the other way around.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's definitely stuff that I've sort of seen online of PE teachers doing and then done in my internships when I was at Middlesex leading the warm-up. And I thought I'd get laughed at, but the lads absolutely loved it and were asking to do more drills of that.
Yeah, 100%. If you come with confidence, that's the key, isn't it? You've got to sell it.
Yeah.
Come in and just say, right, this is what we're doing.
Absolutely. And for those kids, those kids who do harbor professional aspirations, is there a point where you sort of go, right, this needs to look structured, for example, a match day warm-up? Or is it very context driven? So for example, when I started at Middlesex, one of their traditions on certain grounds, obviously we didn't do it places, I tell a lie, we did do it places like Lord's, but not in front of everybody. But the warm-up would start with a kickabout. And in my head, I was thinking, oh, Christ, that's hamstring waiting to go and whatnot. Obviously, the pitches were designed so that people couldn't open up and sprint. But is there a certain time when you say, right, actually, this needs to look structured, this needs to look professional, or is it completely context dependent?
Yeah, I think it's context dependent. So, for example, at under 16 national age grade level, we introduced the concept of an individual warm-up, and I kind of set them the task to, run through what the ramp method is, and we get them to design it, and then straight away we'll go out and pitch the next session, and they'll get 10 minutes to do their individual warm-up. And then they're kind of expected from then on in to do that, and they're allocated time to do that. So that's a level at which things become a bit more structured. And obviously off the back of that, they're playing matches at an international level. So that's the kind of context for those expectations. However, like in the day-to-day situation at the academy, obviously we're made up of guys at different clubs. So we might do stuff that's far more casual and more fun. Like I remember when I was back in the Borders as an assistant coach, every Friday morning we would play a little 3-a-side or 4-a-side game of football, and the guys loved it.
Yeah,
it was a real simple way to get buy-in. Same as yourself, though. We constrained the pitch, so no one was ever going to pull a hammy or do anything like that. We get involved as well and have a kickabout. And these guys are pretty much 17, 18, 19 years old, so they're old enough to do it sensibly when time cold, that's it. But that was a great, they loved it. They look forward to a Friday morning.
And so you'd never, for example, find something like that in a research paper saying, get a ball out, have a kickabout at Lord's, and that'll be your pulse raiser.
Yeah.
You've written a book on how to actually get a job in strength and conditioning, and it goes a lot more than just getting qualifications. Why did you feel the need to write that book is my first question. And my second question is, what are the common skills that you believe aren't addressed through, for example, reading research papers or writing dissertations or other academic type skills?
So firstly, I preface this by saying I don't think I'm a fantastic strength and conditioning coach, but I think I'm very good at constructing relationships with people quite quickly. And I think that's what people underestimate. So 100%, there will be guys out there who are far better technical S&C coaches than me who can't get a job. I guarantee it. So the reason I kind of constructed this resource was like frustration at great coaches who weren't able to get roles, and maybe people who were lesser kind of qualified who were getting them. Frustration at coaches who thought that more qualifications were the answer. So I've got to get a master's, I've got to get a PhD, or I've got to do this extra course. It's like, actually, there's plenty of guys at the top level with just a degree. And I met a lot of aspiring coaches who were failing on the interpersonal part, like who could tell you all about post-activation potentiation, but couldn't hold a conversation in terms of like coaching cues, or couldn't connect with an athlete. So part of it was that. Part of it was a lot of people coming asking me, how do you think I should go about trying to get a job? So I was repeating myself in the same kind of information. I thought, I need to put this down on something, a resource I can give people. And then, kind of the gratefulness for success on my part and being able to get into the industry and paying it forward and kind of helping other people, I guess, not make my mistakes and achieve the success that I've been fortunate enough to achieve.
You mentioned about CPD earlier in the podcast and about bringing people together who you are going to give you something that you can use on Monday morning. I'll use Shane Fitzgibbon as an example at the 2017 Child to Champion conference. Now, whilst I didn't know it was a weakness of mine, Shane delivered a workshop as if we were literally all kids. And when I heard him do that, I was like, Jesus, this is it. This is how I need to talk to kids. This is how I need to engage kids. This is what I've been missing. What advice would you give in terms of these people at university or prospective coaches developing that people skill set that's ultimately probably going to be the difference maker when it comes to them getting a job?
Yeah, 100%. This is massive, and it's not taught in university courses, and it's where most people fall down. Like, we are in a people business. If you don't connect with other human beings, you are not going to make it. The biggest part of that is understanding that people make decisions emotionally and then justify them with logic afterwards. So they might say, oh, you didn't get the job because you didn't have enough experience. But what they got off, they didn't connect with you emotionally. They didn't like you by the end of the interview. It's nothing to do with your work experience. So actually, like, you have to create that connection, that relationship with people and report with people as quickly as possible. So get good at connecting with people from all backgrounds. So young and old, athletes, general public, people above and below your kind of job title. So that's just getting out and having, those relationships. And a big part of this, I would say, and this is where a lot of people also go wrong, is when there's a CPD event, don't go home when everyone goes for a beer. Like, that is where the best conversations will happen. I remember we had Dan Baker, Dan John, and Steve Magnus at a kind of CPD event at St. Mary's. The best conversations happened at the pub around the corner. Like, that's 100%. And people who went home missed out on that because all they saw was the slides. So get good at connecting with people. Don't just stick in your kind of silo of people at your level, your age, and your background. Like, get out, develop your social skills, basically.
Yeah, and likewise, the 2019 LTAD conference run by James Baker and Mike Young, although there were some decent take-homes from the 2-day event itself, all the learning for me happened outside, picking people's brains. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? How would you fix this? 100%. That's, for me, I was like, right, did I really learn anything new? Probably not. But did I take home a lot of stuff from outside the event? Absolutely. And that's, for me, where the value of CPD comes. And to further your point about your video about CPD and what people get from it, if you're not hanging around after and you're complaining at the price of the speakers or whatever, you're missing the whole point. It's the fact you've got everyone there in one room at one time.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of adding value to an organization, so you speak in your, you've spoken in your blogs about how to get a job and saying that it's not just good enough to, for example, hand in your CV. How might a relatively inexperienced coach seek to add value to an organization that's had coaches, for example, who have been there for decades or are vastly more experienced than this new intern coming into the organization?
I can't remember what book I read. I read a lot of books, but where I kind of first came across this idea, like you need to add value. You don't get paid because of what's in the job description. You get paid because you're adding value. So if you want to get a role, you need to contribute something over and above what the expectation is. So my easiest piece of advice here is spot a gap and fill it. So if there's a gap in return to play protocols, for example, a gap in GPS monitoring or growth and maturation or contact skills in rugby or something you've spotted, spot it, fill it, and let them know you're filling it. So for example, when I first got my full-time role in the Scottish Rugby Academy, I, from the get-go, said, I'm really interested in growth and maturation. That's my bag. I want to do some more research into that. I want to produce a couple of papers and post presentations. And I did. Last UKSCA, we had 2 that were there that were with the kind of master's students here. So I kind of did that. I put my money where my mouth was and I delivered on it. So there's something you can add to your portfolio for the next interview. So spot a gap and fill it.
And in regards to filling that gap and obviously actually spotting it, you say that actually a lot of people ignore opportunities that they might perceive as lesser opportunities, whether it's working with youth athletes, whether it's working with general population. What advice would you give to somebody who, for example, knows they need experience, knows they probably need to do an internship of some kind? What advice would you give in terms of prospective coaches evaluating whether or not they should go for this internship or this internship?
Yeah, I think I don't have any kind of evidence to back this up other than anecdotal. But what I've noticed from the people that I was at university with and who went on to get work experience and then went on to get a role is you should get work experience at or above the level you want to work at. So if you want to work in the Premiership, don't get experience at League Two. If you want to work at League Two, getting experience around the corner with your local amateur team isn't going to cut it. So what I've noticed is guys get experience at a certain level and then there's kind of a plus or minus 1 in terms of where they end up. So if they got experience in League Two, they didn't get a job at a Premiership club. So you see what I'm saying here? So you should be experience at or above the level you want to work at or the job you want. The second part would be to make sure it's actually valuable. So is there a structured CPD plan? Do you know that there's coaches there you specifically want to learn something from? Have there been successful previous interns that have gone on to get jobs, or did it just spit out another 5 and next year they get another 5? It's a big one. The other thing I would say, and people make this big mistake, is if you're at uni for 3 years or 4 years in Scotland, year 1, get experience in the academy. Year 2, progress to the under-18s or the reserves or the under-23s or whatever it is these days. And then the final year, go and get it at the pro, because then you've got experience coaching at 3 different levels. If all you ever do is coach the pros, it stands to reason that your next job is highly likely not going to be a pro environment. It's going to be maybe the academy. And suddenly you have no experience coaching people who are beginners in strength training. It's an entirely different thing coaching a pro who knows how to back squat, knows how to bench press, and you're just prescribing the sets and reps compared to a kid who's never touched a back squat in their life. So get experience coaching across a range of age groups.
Yeah. And even in one of your recent posts about the work being done at Hibernian, you mentioned a lot of things which naturally as a coach of professional athletes you might take for granted, but just making sure the room flows well, making sure that it's ready to go. And you've not got, for example, kids arguing about rack height, or you've got a kid who's 6'8" and a kid who's 4'8" working in the same thing. What other things or what other aspects of coaching do you think you only get with experience? So for example, again, we've spoken about the difference between research and experience. There's not going to be a research paper saying don't pair a 6'8" kid with a 4'8" kid. But what other coaching examples can you think of that you've only learned having the experience that you've got?
I think like a lot of the coaching cues that I use that I've arrived at and kind of know work, and that, you know, not for everyone, but maybe for 90% of people. It was really interesting actually when I was at Hibs. I was watching Steve Kernan coach players, and he used exactly the same cue that I use, which is land like a ninja. Really, we've never spoken about it. We've never discussed it. He's never watched me coach. That's the first time I watched him coach, and we use the same cue. So there's obviously a reason we've both arrived at that, and it's experience. So things like the cues I use, the progressions I use as well. So there's a very particular kind of progression system that I use for coaching a squat, for example. I've arrived at that after years of trying to teach people to back squat first and it not working. So a kind of segmented approach in terms of what I'm looking for and how I'm challenging. So those would be the biggest things. The other thing would be, like, I guess the human aspect, like realizing that if your athletes don't like you, like it comes back to what I said earlier about making decisions emotionally and justifying them with logic. If your athletes don't like you, there's already an inherent resistance to your program, even if it's in their benefit, because emotionally they don't want to do something for you because they don't like you. If they like you, you're already going to get better buy-in. And actually how much the athlete is consistent with your program dictates the results and dictates the performance of it. So you could have someone who has a fantastic program, but who has zero athlete buy-in, doesn't get the results. You could have someone who has a really shoddy program, but the athletes believe in them and the program 100%, and they get brilliant results. So who's really the good coach there? Is it the person who's produced the complex one, but got no buy-in, or the person who produced something really simple, but has got the buy-in from the athlete?
Yeah. One thing I mean, I'm sure there'll be more research papers coming out. I don't know how you'd quite standardize it, but going back to the UKSCA conference in 2017, I think, where John Kiley spoke and saying that even the relationship with how an athlete views said exercise, or as you said, how the athlete gets on with the coach, can possibly even affect the adaptation that they're getting. I'd love to see, for example, two group of athletes do the same program, but one is just led by a different coach each week and they can't really build a relationship, versus one group where they absolutely idolize their coach and would run through a brick wall, and just simply see how that affects results on testing day.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it reminds me of, I'm pretty sure it was Ashley Jones that said this, but he said that every season he would give his program to his rival clubs. And he's no insecurity in doing that, because I know even with the sets and reps and the exercise, they're not going to coach it the way I coach it, because they're not going to use the cues. They don't have the relationship with the players. They don't understand the rationale. So even giving them black and white, exactly the same program, is like, they still won't get the results I'll get.
That's brilliant. I absolutely love that. I mean, when I was at EIS with GB Boxing, I remember pestering the coaches. I was like, where's this part in the program? And, you know, can I have a look at the program? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. But, you know, if you don't understand the rationale, how it's coached, how it's delivered, why this athlete's doing this because they're preparing for this competition on this date versus these athletes who've got a little bit longer. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make. They think there's this one magical program that, regardless of context, 100%. This one magical program will, for you, get you your hypertrophy goals, your strength goals, your performance goals. And for you, it'll get you into your wedding dress. And it all, you know, there's this one secret that people are waiting for.
Yeah, definitely.
Just to wrap up, so you said, obviously, you mentioned a few books off air, and you said, obviously, personal development is something that's very important to you. I'm going to ask for one person that you would recommend for me or just other listeners to follow on social media, and why. One person for me to speak to, and why. And maybe we'll go one book to read, and why.
Mm-hmm. So the person to follow on social media, I had thought about this because there's an awful lot. But the person I picked out would be James Baker. So from Performance and Aspire Qatar. So his kind of social media handle is @Performance Team. Just because of the awesome work that he's done in implementing LTAD. And he shares a lot of that in terms of the videos, the kind of thought process, the structure, the plans. So that's someone really useful to follow on social media. In terms of one person to speak to and why, I would say Dan Baker, because I've been fortunate enough to have a few beers with Dan. I like him a lot. And he's really open with his information. He'll tell you exactly what he did at the Broncos, how he did it, why he did it, what the setup was. He's also someone who, you know, he's got a PhD, so he can talk at the highest level, but equally he can bring it down to layman's terms really easily, and is really accessible, and is a good guy. What was the other one? A book? One book. Restricting me to one. So I try and read a book a month minimum, because there's so much great stuff out there. So there's a lot of really good books. The thing that springs to mind at the moment would be The One Thing. Because I've read that quite recently. So that kind of premise behind that is, what's the one thing that's giving you the biggest bang for your buck? So whether that's a training program or kind of building your business, it's about really focusing in on that, protecting your time around that, and driving that forward. So similar to the Pareto principle in economics in terms of the 20% that's giving you your 80% return. So.
And ironically, talking about the one thing, obviously we've spoken about CPD, we've spoken about business, obviously all things strength and conditioning. If sports coaches or parents were to take one thing from this chat, or S&C coaches, whichever market you prefer, what would you like that one thing to be?
I would say strength and conditioning is more than just lifting weights. It's more than just the gym. So I know parents are often kind of apprehensive about that. So yes, that is important. We do want our guys to get strong, but it's about developing a toolbox of athletic skills. So that means things for students that probably didn't get covered in your university course. So that means gymnastics, calisthenics, things like animal flow, wrestling, in addition to your usual squat, bench, deadlift, clean programs, etc. So thinking outside the box as to what strength conditioning is, because it's a whole lot more than just lifting. It's a toolbox of athletic skills.
Oh, absolutely. As I think it's the title of a book somewhere, but it's not just about sets and reps. And finally, before I sort of say goodbye and thank you for your time, where can the listeners find out more about yourself, Athletic Evolution, and the services you provide?
So the first place would be the website, so athletikevolution.co.uk, which is where we do a lot of our kind of blog posts, ask the expert interviews, and product reviews and stuff like that. The second one, where you'll get more content, will be Facebook. So if you look up Athletic Evolution, you'll find us there. Really been trying to produce a lot of good video content there for people. And then Twitter and Instagram, just at AthleticEvoUK, would be the best place to find us.
Perfect. And I will provide links to your book on how to actually get a job in strength and conditioning. And of course, the Athletic Evolution conference on June the 2nd. I'll put links to the tickets in the show notes as well. Absolute pleasure chatting to you, Rob. And thank you very much for your time.
You too. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'm sure we'll catch up soon. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.